Welcome to Real Talk. I am Ann, and Denise Bard is guest hosting today. We are so excited to welcome Dr. Don Bartlette. Now, I have known you for decades when I was a young newspaper reporter and had the chance to interview you. And secret be told, I had seen you many times speak before that. And one day I was sitting in a restaurant. I knew who you were, and I had just come out of a really horrible abusive relationship. And I wanted so badly to go over and talk to you. And I did get your contact information from you. It was a divine appointment
that happens
for
so
us.
often when I travel. I've been in airports where people recognize me. I've been in the bedroom in Chicago where they recognize my voice. I had a woman running after me one time on a trip in Denver. She wanted to give me a hug and shake my hands, and I was going to miss my flight. So I kept running, and she kept running, and finally I thought, you know what? She's more important than making my flight. So it happens all the time here in Canton, Ohio at the mall. I had a woman the other day tell me she heard me 44 years ago. She remembered the title of my message. She remembered all the details. And then that happens all the time.
Well, you're pretty memorable. I mean, your story in a good way. In a good way. I mean, I remember when you and I sat down and got to actually speak together for the newspaper. And then I got to go hear you speak at a school. Actually, it was at a school. And I'll never forget it. Never.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, so you are a speaker, social worker, counselor, consultant, advocate for minorities, for child abuse survivors and survivors of alcohol addiction, as you have lived your life with what they now call fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And you speak on persons on disabilities and troubled youth. You are a French Canadian, Native American. And with this being Native American Heritage Month, I thought that this would be a perfect time to have you on our podcast. You speak on the psychological experiences you have had as a Chippewa Indian child, growing up with emotional, speech, and physical disabilities in an environment of poverty, family, school violence, juvenile delinquency, homelessness, child abuse, racism, and as we said, alcoholism. I mean, you have the spectrum. You can talk about it all. And you have a book chronicling your life called Macaroni at Midnight, which I have. And I'd also like to touch a little bit on one person making a difference on your life, because we talk about that on this podcast. And I know that that happened to you, and also how to survive in a multicultural world. So we're going to kind of run the gamut today, but I'm just going to kind of toss it to you, Don, because I am so excited to have you, because it has been so long for me that I've seen you actually face to face here. So I'm so excited.
And this is Native American, but, internationally. So it's very appropriate that we do it today, yeah.
Well, I'm just going to toss it to you and let you kind of tell a little bit about your story, or tell your story. Just go ahead and tell it, because this is something that everybody needs to hear.
All right. Well, let me begin by sharing with you that in 1939, in a one-room log cabin up in the hills of North Dakota, 5 miles from Canada, a very poor Native American man and woman were awaiting my arrival. It was a very cold winter night. The one-room log cabin had no electricity, no running water. It was a dirt floor. My parents were very, very poor and living in a world of isolation, actually, 5 miles away from that small white community near Canada. And on that whole winter night in 1939, 84 years ago, actually. They brought me into the world. My father was a very macho man, a very strong man, a hunter, a fisherman. He had it all, basically. And he always wanted a son to be everything he was. But in my book and in the movie, Macaroni at Midnight, I share that I was not the boy he wanted. As I came into their world, I had only half a nose. I had no upper lip, and in the top of my mouth was a very large opening. We now call it severe cleft palate and lip condition. But in 1939, they knew very little about my disability. And remember, my people were poor; they were isolated. And then white people in that small community did not want my family to be involved in that community. So when my father looked at my face, he made a decision that affects me even yet today. My father ran away. He couldn't handle the fact that I was a disabled son. And as he ran away, my father ran into a world of alcoholism. And he remained in that world for many, many years. So he left me alone with my mother. My mother was a beautiful Native American woman who valued life very deeply. And because of her belief that all lives were important, my mother hung on to me, not knowing what to do. It was a tragic birth, actually. I never saw my baby picture for 21 years. And when I saw my picture, it helped me to understand why my father ran away. And as he left my mother and me all alone in that one room log cabin, on her own, my mother, a warrior woman, actually put her arms around me and hung on to me, wanted me, not knowing what to do with me, however. When my grandmother heard that I had a severe disability and that my father, her son, had run off, she came up into the hills. She saw my face. She ran into that white community where they had a doctor. And when the doctor came up into the hills, being a man overwhelmed by prejudice and racism, he threw his hands up in the air onto my mother, and he told my mother, he'll never talk, he'll never learn, send him away or let him die. They have a mental hospital an hour from here. You might want to put him there. My mother wouldn't hear that. My mother wanted to be a mother. She wanted to be my mother. She valued. And as she hung on to me, that really angered the white doctor to have a Native woman defy him. So he went back into that small community and he told the white people that I was a handicapped, cleft palate Indian child. And when they heard I might never talk, might never learn, out of their fear, and I believe today, out of their racial prejudice, some of the people came up into the hills, took me away from my mother, and they sent me 22 miles away to a small white hospital in another community. Never brought my mother with me. They took her away from me. And that happened so often then. And as they put me in the hospital, when I began writing my book years later, I did a lot of research and found out that they literally left me alone on a bed in that hospital. And I believe they were hoping I might die. I did not die. And one day, a young white male medical student from the University of North Dakota came into that hospital to do his field work experience. And it was when he saw my face, when he saw the color of my skin, he demanded that they help me. And only then, they pulled the left-hand side of my face over to my right-hand side, leaving me with a very flat nose for 17 years. They repaired my upper lip, but they did absolutely nothing with that hole in the top of my mouth. And for 17 years, I could not speak clearly. I had gargled sound, and people used to think I was severely handicapped, that I had no IQ, just the way people thought in the 1930s. And when they did that repair work, only then the welfare worker, a white woman, who did not value me or my family, she took me back to my mother and left me with my mother. And for 9 years, as a child, I remember my mother so well. On her own, without any help from my father, because he was drinking and having an affair with another Indian woman for years, bearing other children outside of the marriage, I learned years later. And on her own, my mother took care of me for 9 years, going down to the river and bringing water back to the log cabin. And I remember her dropping the water down that hole so I might survive another day. And when my mother and I became hungry, the welfare workers did nothing. Nothing. I want to make that clear. She did nothing to help my mother and me survive. So my mother would go down into that white community at nighttime and steal food from the farmer's field so we might eat the next day. We call that poverty. We call that hunger. We call that malnutrition today. My mother was a survivor. And for 9 years, I remember her teaching me use my hands to communicate to her what I was feeling when I had an earache or when my stomach was hurting, when the tears ran down my face, because I couldn't understand as a child why I never had a father. And so my mother would sit down with me. In fact, I have a picture in my book of her and me on the front step of that log cabin, and she would point at the leaves falling down from the tree, teaching me about nature, about life, holding my hand and always telling me over and over, one day you'll talk. One day you'll talk. I couldn't imagine as a child ever being able to talk, but she had faith, and her faith in God helped her to help me. And for 9 years, I remained home. I wasn't allowed in church. I wasn't allowed in school. I wasn't allowed in that white community. And I hate to share this really, but I want to be authentic about my people and my culture. Even my own relatives did not help my mother the way they should have. And on her own, for 9 years, she helped me survive. One day, I was so hungry, I decided to go down into that white community. My mother told me to never go there, but I was hungry. And as I went into that white community, I found an area that I'll never forget, right by the railroad track. Now they call it the city dump ground. And as a young child, I went into the dump ground, and there I met the only friend I ever had in those 9 years. Not even my own relatives were a part of my life. But in the dump ground, I found the rat. I remember playing with the rat, running and jumping with them, pretending they were my friends. And in the dump ground, I found food, I found warm clothing, and I found comic books. And as I brought them home with me, I remember my mother sitting on the doorstep, and with a third grade education on her Indian reservation, to the best of her ability, I remember her sounding out the words and hoping I was understanding. And then one day she asked me, "Where are you finding all these things?" Well, I couldn't talk. So she followed me one day in the dump ground. And when she saw me playing with the rat, my mother became an advocate for my education and my socialization. She broke every social taboo in that white community when she took me to a Catholic elementary school, because my mother was Roman Catholic. And as she tried to enroll me, it was a nun who told my mother, in front of me, by the way, in front of me, "We will not allow him in our school. He can't talk, he can't learn, and the doctor said he might be mentally retarded." My mother didn't know what that meant then, nor I. But years later, when I became a member of the Presidential Committee on Mental Retardation, I told them my story. And as my mother took me away from the Catholic school, she defied the social regulations even more by taking me to the public school. And fearful that they might reject me too, she told me, "Remain here, see all the kids, follow them into that building, and then look for a number 1." And she showed me what 1 looked like. And as I ran up to the group of children, what we now call child abuse, peer violence, rejection, bullying, they took me by my hair. They threw me into the building, hitting me, laughing at me, calling me names like Donald Duck, as I could not talk. And I'll never forget her. Never forget her. A white girl from a wealthy family, a church family, walked up to me, and in front of her peer group, she spit all over my face. And she told me, "We don't want you in our school." And as I ran into their school, honoring my mother's request, I found the room with the number 1 on it. And the reason I became an educator years later is the fact that the first teacher I ever had locked me in a janitor's closet day after day. She would not teach me. She would not allow me in her classroom. When I went back to North Dakota 2 years ago at the invitation of a librarian who took the risk of having me come home and share publicly my story, one of the people who heard me that night remembered my first grade teacher, and she verified publicly what had happened to me. I remember as a child hearing my classmates learning, writing on the blackboard. I never did that. I was locked away in a janitor's closet. People wonder why I became a doctor of special education. My motivation began there. Locked away, isolated, separated. Never went in the second grade, and never. Check my academic record. I have them in my book. They put me in the third grade. And in the third grade, it was a teacher who told my classmates, don't look at him, don't play with him.
Oh.
He's mentally retarded. And I could never understand what that word meant. But every time it became a part of my life, bullying became a part of my life. The classmates took me up into the hill one day and believing I would never be able to talk, I would never remember, they tied my hands around my back to a tree. And as they hit me in my face, repeatedly, the blood ran downward on my shirt. And they ran away laughing, and they left me alone, up in the hill, tied to a tree. My mother had no idea where I was, what had happened to me. When I did not return home, she went looking all over the community. Nobody tried to help her. Nobody. Late that night, up in the hills of North Dakota, tied to a tree, I began hearing the sounds of the animals. The fear
Oh my.
that overcame me haunts me yet today. The memory. But God is a powerful mystery. That night, from Canada, from a Hutterite colony, an old man, long hair, black clothes, and a long beard. Why he walked through the hills, I never found out. He found me. Untied the rope and told me to run home. And as I ran home that night, there was a man on the doorstep of that one-room log cabin waiting for me. Had no idea who he was. And my mother told me, this is your dad. This is your father. As I looked up at him, tall, strong, alcoholic, angry, when I could not tell him how the blood arrived on my shirt. What my Native American family, even today, does not want anyone to know. And the reason they tried to kill me in 1981 when they heard I was writing a book, fearful that I might expose the secrets of family violence and child abuse and alcoholism. My father took me. And what no child will ever forget. He threw me. He kicked me. And as he continued hurting me, in her desperation, my mother ran to me, put her arms around me, told him not to hurt me anymore. He took me. And as he threw me against the wall, he grabbed my mother's hair. I will never forget that moment. And as he threw her into a window, she cried out, and I can do nothing. When I made a choice, I ran away.
Mm-hmm.
I ran into that small white community, and there I became a juvenile delinquent, homeless, hungry, suicidal. Our native young people today have the highest suicide rates in America.
Mm-hmm.
I understand why.
Yeah.
I understand why. I thought about ending my life over and over and over, jumping into the river. Every time I go home, I go back in the river. But I remember every time I went to jump, it seemed like there were invisible arms around me, not allowing me to jump. Today I know why. Today I understand, my God. I didn't jump, but I thought about it so many times. Breaking into homes, stealing food, money. I became a juvenile delinquent.
You were
And
just
one
trying
night
to survive.
I went back to the elementary school, broke into the library, and I took a book. And I remember my mother always reading to me, and I wanted to read. I wanted to learn. I wanted to comprehend. And as I took that book, out of my tiredness, out of my hunger, I fell asleep on the floor in the library. Never, ever thinking that my life would change dramatically come morning. When I went back to my hometown 2 years ago, I shared this publicly.
Mm-hmm.
In the morning, 2 white policemen came into the library, took me by my hair. That is racism. Locked me in the trunk of their automobile and took me to the local jail. And when I went back home to share my story, my younger sister came to hear me. She defied the family ban on having anything to do with me. She came to hear me, sat next to my wife in the library, and as I shared the experience of the 2 policemen at the end of my lecture, she stood up and she verified my life story. She and I are very close today. And that night, I told that community about the 2 policemen who removed my clothing, who sexually abused me with a billy club, damaging for years my self-image, my worthiness. But that began for me a spiral that took many, many years for me to get away from. We call it hate. We call it hate. And I began hating white people. I began hating my handicap, my native culture. I began hating my alcoholic father. Hate dominated my existence for years. And when my father came after me, the next day I had black and blue marks all over me. But he never knew about the black and blue marks inside of me, because I could not talk. And as he took me home, I shared the movie, and in my book, we show a 12-year-old Indian boy walking home with his tall father. And that boy began hoping that now everything will change. I mean, he came after me. You know, he's walking home with me. He must care about me. But what many of our children yet today on every reservation, in every urban ghetto, what every child is yet experiencing. My father took me home, locked the door, and as we moved his leather belt, he told my mother emphatically, "He is not my son." And when I heard that, psychodynamically, the hurt turned into more hate. And as I crawled over to the wall, I took my father's rifle. I had seen him shoot rabbits and deer many, many times. And as I took the rifle in my hands, at the age of 12, I aimed it at my father, and I wanted him to die. I wanted him to die. And as I went to pull the trigger, I couldn't understand why then. My mother came rushing up to me, knocked the rifle out of my hands, and then she told me what I'll never forget. She said, "We must not kill. We must not kill." Why would my mother not want to kill him? She was a victim of violence. He called her names that were unbelievable. And he had affairs with another Indian woman. She knew it. But she valued life. Even my father's life. Even my father's life. And it was at that time in my childhood, a white woman in that small community. She heard about my being in jail. She heard about my not being in school. She had a daughter, beautiful child, came home one day and told her mother about the Indian boy now in jail, out of school, living in a one-room shack up in the hills. Her daughter told her mother how everybody made fun of me and the teachers locked me in the closet and 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 when the white woman heard her own daughter laughing about me, she made a choice. And this is why I travel worldwide today, even at the age of 84. And I'll do it until I die. I want people to know that all the turmoil we're going through in our country, how hate can be overcome by love. One white woman. And that's why I wrote the book. That's why we're making the movie. I want the world to know that love overcomes hate. It happened in my life through the power, through the compassion, through the dedication, through the volunteerism of one woman. And I've been very frank with you, and you know the story anyway. She was wealthy. Important in that community. A church woman. There were 7 churches in my hometown. None of them helped my family ever. And this white woman, one day, came into my life, and it took me months to write that chapter. And I had to remember that one moment where she put her hand on mine And out of her compassion, looking at me, respecting me, loving me, valuing me, she said, Don, I will not hurt you. I think you can learn, and I want to help you. Wealthy, prominent, a church member. She and her husband owned the only grocery store in that community. They were rich. Their daughter went to Europe. She owned horses. She became North Dakota potato queen. Potato queen. Beautiful child. But she did not value me. And when her mother put her hand on mine and said, come into my home, her daughter went to her room and never came out of it.
Oh, my.
Her mother brought me into their house. I always share. And now I live in the same kind of house. I call it my mansion. We live in a beautiful home today. And it is a mansion to me. She had chandeliers. We have one in the hallway. She had a living room. We have one now. 4 bathrooms. If you can imagine. She had everything. Everything. Carpet on the floor. And in the movie, they showed the 12-year-old Indian boy touching the carpet. I couldn't imagine what it was. It was warm and soft.
Yeah.
And when she saw my poverty, when she recognized I wanted to learn, she took me into her dining room. We have a dining room. We have 42 members in my family. And they all come home and eat my food. She brought me into her dining room. And I'll never forget. She told me, you might be hungry. Eat my food. Couldn't believe it. Bananas, milk, mashed potatoes, gravy, corn. And she told me to eat. But I did not know how to chew my food then. It all went down that hole automatically. Nobody ever helped my mother help me learn how to chew my food. It was that white woman, Ann. She took her hand, gave me a fork, and holding my hand, she began teaching me how to put the food in between my teeth, how to chew the food. I thought she had a problem. I really did. But then I began feeling her love. And as I began learning how to chew the food, she began telling her husband and her daughter, he's not retarded. He can't talk. But I know he can learn. And they began laughing at her. Her husband, a man of the church, told her, either he goes or you go. I heard it, Ann. I heard it.
Oh, my.
And she looked at him and said, I will not send him home. We will help him. And for years, she commandeered on her own my rehabilitation, my learning. I learned how to eat. I learned how to drink without the milk coming through my nose. She taught me. I learned how to read from her. She let me have all of her books, and she would sit down with me like my teacher should have done. And she began reading to me, helping me explain. If you ever come into my home in North Canton, Ohio, I have books in every room of our house. Every room. I have books in my garage. Hundreds of books. I love to read. Yet today, I read all the time.
Well, you really value
the white woman
learning.
Who fostered that desire to read and learn. I'll never forget her. And then one day, she violated the social taboos, as my mother had done. She took me back into school, and using her prominence, using her authority, using her wealth, using her power, she told the school, he is not retarded. He is learning, and you will help him. I mean, she knew everybody. The school board, the mayor, the county commissioner, the welfare worker. She knew what was happening. And my teacher told the white woman in my presence, which I have never done when I became a teacher. When I began teaching teachers how to teach. My wife, in fact, was my intern. And I taught her how to work with handicapped kids. You never talk in front of them. My teacher told the white woman, well, he smells like an Indian, and I don't want him in my classroom. The white woman was astounded when she heard her own people using racism. She took me home, and in the movie and in my book, one of my favorite times with the white woman is when she told me, you may use our shower. I didn't know what a shower was, never had one. And she told me verbally, go in that room and there'll be soap and shampoo and just wash your whole body. 12 years old, Native American, poverty overwhelming my childhood. I walked into her bathroom, and as I walked out of her bathroom in the movie, we showed the 12-year-old Don Bartlette soap and shampoo all over my clothes, all over my shoes. And the white woman said to me gently, my, we have a lot to learn. And as she began learning from me, I learned from her. Macaroni at Midnight tells the story of a white woman putting a clothespin on my nose, putting a mirror under my nose, and with her hand on my shoulder, and her food in front of me. Food motivates children to learn and survive. It was her food that motivated Don Bartlette. And as she put her hand on my shoulder, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, what the welfare department never tried, what the medical people would not try, she taught me how to move my tongue for the first time in my life at the age of 12. She taught me how to make the air come through my lips rather than my nose. And for years, I began learning how to make sounds. And Macaroni at Midnight tells the world today that one night she told me, run home, show your mother and father what you're learning. I shook my head no. I wanted nothing to do with my father. I was afraid of it. But she told me, Don, your mother loves you. I met her. I've talked to her. And she did. She did. And that night, around the midnight hour, as I ran home, fearful of my father, my mother welcomed me. She knew the white woman was helping me. She had a hot bowl of macaroni waiting for me. And as I picked up my fork, as I put the macaroni at midnight in between my teeth, that was the moment my father said to my mother, "How do you learn that?" And my mother said, "Abraham, the white woman in town, she told me one day he'll talk. This is your son, Abraham. He needs you." And that was the moment I put my tongue in the right place. I made the air flow, remembering everything the white woman had taught me. And that night, I made a sound, pointing at the macaroni. And as my father heard me trying to talk, what I never thought would ever happen, he and my mother went to the white woman together. They crossed the bridge from Indian culture, from poverty, from hunger, from alcoholism, from child abuse, from family violence. They crossed the bridge, and both of them met the white woman in her plan to help me. And Macaroni at Midnight became the story of the white woman engineering, networking with all of the community agencies, welfare department, county commissioner, the mayor, speech and hearing clinic, the doctors. And for many, many years, I received special therapy, and I learned how to talk in the manner I now speak. And as I began speaking, the white woman hired me to work in the grocery store, and I became the first Native American to be employed in a white man's business. She taught me how to put groceries in the shelves, how to mark the prices on them, how to deal with the produce, everything I needed to know. And as I became employed, her husband began moving away from his prejudice when he saw me becoming a valued employee. And I share this with all of my Native people internationally because I want them to know you have to have a work ethic to survive today. You have to have one. And as I showed him, I wanted to work. And as he began understanding that academically in the high school, I was learning. And he hired me to become the bookkeeper of the grocery store. Unheard of. Trusting me with their money, with the numbers, working with internal revenue, making sure that they were doing everything legal. I became a trusted employee. And he began seeing the impact of her work. And as I became able to buy my own clothing, to pay for a haircut, to be a part of my high school, I began working at other enterprises. In fact, I tell all of my children today, I had 5 jobs in high school. 5. I always had money. I had nice clothes. My hair was cut. And I began, unfortunately, believing that if I were white, I would make it. And I began wanting to be white. And I made it, and I became the first handicapped Native American valedictorian of my high school. And as I began demonstrating what I could do, the white woman challenged me even more. And she said, Don, I think you should go to the university. And with my new speech, I told the white woman then, no way. I want to live with you. I want to work in your grocery store. I don't want to leave my mother. And the white woman said, Don, you are intelligent. You have a future, Don. You can be anything you want if you went to the university. And then she said, if you go, I will mail you food. And Anne, she did. She did. I have one chapter in my book titled Cereal from Canada. She would mail me cereal from Canada. I never went hungry at the university. 3 universities. Became a social worker, became a counselor, became a therapist. And then one day she said, Don, why did you become a doctor? I think you have it in you. And that's why they now call me Dr. Bartlette, PhD in special education. And as I went to the university, I began passing for white. I have a photo in my book of me in a suit with a white shirt, necktie, wearing a hat, passing for white. And I made it at the university. I made it. Outstanding social work senior, big man on campus, became popular, president of my social work club. There wasn't anything I could do, Anne. And I thought I was white. I wanted to be white. I left my native culture. I left my family behind me. Always helped them financially. Always helped them financially. But I didn't want to be Indian ever again. And unfortunately for me, being a victim of sexual abuse and child abuse and having an alcoholic father, I began that same journey as an alcoholic at the university. I cannot tell you how many times I was drunk, and yet academically I won the highest honors at my alma mater, all 3 of them. But I was an alcoholic, and I share in my book a very difficult experience for me. And that's when I became involved with a beautiful, white, wealthy university student. And took her into my life, took her into my hurt, and introduced her to alcohol. And today she no longer living. She died an alcoholic. And I ran away to California, San Francisco. And there in 1964, I became a part of the American Indian movement, a revolutionary organization. I wore a red bandana, but my hair grew long. Went back to my native culture out of anger. And in San Francisco, I became an underground militant revolutionary, hurting many, many people. I remember we broke into the National Republican Convention, and on top of Nob Hill one day, when Goldwater wanted to be president, and his wife Peggy were walking into the hotel. I walked up to her and I spit in her face. And I remember Mrs. Goldwater looking at me and she said, "What have I ever done to you? I don't even know you." I couldn't tell her about the white girl in my hometown who spit in my face. Isn't that interesting? Psychodynamically, the child turns into the adult. I'll never forget that moment. And it was in San Francisco where they found me one night, drunk out of my mind, on the doorstep of Race Cathedral, the largest cathedral in San Francisco. And when they put me in the hospital, it was a Jewish psychiatrist who interviewed me. And he said, "Mr. Bartlette, I have the feeling you're running away from something." I would not tell him. I couldn't tell him. I didn't want him to know. I didn't want anybody to know. And then the psychiatrist said to me, "I think you need to return to where you came from and find healing." And that's when I did that. I went back to North Dakota, went back to the university, got my master's degree, moved to Michigan, began working with minority, handicapped children, poverty children, rejected children, children from abuse backgrounds that nobody else wanted to work with. And as I became director of a residential treatment center in Detroit, Michigan, that's how I met my wife. She came from the University of Michigan, where I used to be a professor part-time, teaching social work principles. She came into my office one day, and I didn't know it then, but she came from one of the wealthiest General Motors families in Detroit, Michigan. Her father was top man in General Motors. He ran the whole worldwide energy program.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know that then. And as she came into my office one day, she said, "I want to learn how to work with minority children." And she was beautiful, absolutely gorgeous, university student. And as I took her into my program, teaching her how to work with children of poverty, children of disability, children of diversity, she will tell the world one day she fell in love with who I was, but not romantically. She just fell in love with who I was professionally. And out of that, I married my intern before it became an ethical issue in America. I married her, not knowing her background, and she not knowing my background. And what her family hopes I will never share, when she took me home to meet her wealthy, prominent General Motors evangelical family, I came face to face with some of the worst racism imaginable in her father, the man who never hired a black engineer at General Motors, the man who helped build a church in Anderson, Indiana, a man who went to church faithfully with his family, a man who knew the Word of God better than I do today. The epitome of power. And I came face to face with him. He took my suitcase and he put it at the end of their driveway. And he told my wife, now my wife, he is not welcome in our home. Horrible man. racist. Only last week at a family function in Indiana, a family wedding, her brother came up to me last weekend and he said, Don, I want to ask your forgiveness for all the hurt my father and I put you through. It wasn't right. It was not right. And I'm telling you, Ann, for the last week, I have been walking on cloud nine. 54 years of marriage. And to finally have my own in-law tell me, I am sorry. I should have never treated you the way I did. He's a world-famous doctor today.
Oh, my goodness.
More important than that, he's a man of God. And my wife and I came back from the family wedding with a whole new relationship.
That's amazing.
My wife never once rejected me. She left a world of wealth to marry me 54 years ago. She rebelled against the racism. She saw something in me that she wanted to be a part of. And now as the mother of 8 children, 7 girls and 1 boy, all professional, all college graduates, what never used to happen in a Native man's journey. All of my children are highly educated, highly professional, and most important of all, from me, they learned the work ethic. They learned how to work. Because the woman in that small town taught me how to work.
That's amazing.
All of our children are prominent, wealthy. It's unbelievable, Ann. It's unbelievable.
It's beautiful.
And today, at the age of 84, I still travel worldwide sharing my life story, my faith journey, my testimony. I volunteer for Chick-fil-A part-time, 36 years now.
I've seen you there.
Giving away free food, making deliveries, handing out free coupons, helping Black populations, diverse organizations with free food. And December 9th, actually, one organization is honoring me locally for my volunteerism. And so I'm inviting all kinds of people to come and attend the banquet. Judges, lawyers. I know people all over Stark County. They all know me.
Everybody knows you.
And they know who I am.
Yes.
And I just thank God every day of my life for allowing me to be who I am, for having a family that loves me, that care about me. When I had my heart attack, when I woke up and they were all in the room, they came in my home and put in railways in the hallways, repaired the bedroom so I could mobilize, fix the bathroom so I could take a shower. They did everything imaginable to make sure that I might survive the heart attack. And here I am, 11 months later, walking, talking, flying, speaking, volunteering, all because of a family who believe in the power of God, the power of love. And so I want to thank you for sharing my story today. And, yeah, that's Macaroni at Midnight in a nutshell.
Well, Don, I mean, I was fighting back the tears a lot
I was
of
too.
that. I mean, for one thing, I have some questions, and I'm sure Denise does too. But one of the things I wanted to ask you was, did you have surgeries with your mouth? I thought that I remembered that being part of the
Yes,
story.
I had 17 major surgeries in my childhood and adolescence. 17. They gave me
Okay,
new
that's what
teeth.
I thought.
They repaired the nose. I had years of dental work. 17 surgeries in all. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and they closed that
And that
whole.
reminds me, I was in, I was in Guatemala, 20 years ago. I remember my family coming to the airport and seeing me off. And when I arrived in Guatemala to share my life story, I met a 17-year-old boy who could not speak with a severe cleft palate in Albuquerque, New Mexico, 40 years ago. I met a Navajo 17-year-old boy with no speech because of a cleft palate.
Do you know my son was born fetal alcohol, and he has lots of issues. And we were just at the fetal alcohol FASD clinic in Ohio. I don't know if you're even aware that they have one
Very much.
in Columbus, but he was just there, and they did all that testing with his speech and everything to see how he was speaking in the air, and trying to teach him how to speak and everything, which he really doesn't have the same issues that you did. He's actually pretty physically okay.
Wow.
But we got that was part of the testing that he had to go through. So I
Right.
knew exactly what you were talking about when you were
I've
speaking
done a
about
lot of
that.
work. I've done a lot of work with fetal alcohol syndrome all over the nation. And in Canada, the incidence of fetal alcohol syndrome is amazingly high. Amazingly high. In Canada,
Right.
there is more racism towards First Nation people than we have here in America. In fact, even today, I've been there. Today, my people are totally isolated from anywhere. You have to fly into the reservation. The only way you can get there. If you don't have money, you don't go anywhere. They are isolated. The
Is that
Canadian
why?
government isolates my people so they have no contact outside of the reservation. I've been there. The poverty, the suicide, the alcohol. It's like there's more racism in Canada than there is in America.
Is that why there's so much suicide?
Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you why there was so much suicide in Native American
The
or
hunger, the poverty, the isolation, the violence, the hate. My people and black people have very high rates of being sent to prison for minor offenses. Happens yet today. Black people have the highest rate of prison population. My people are second. Yeah, in North Dakota today, by whole state, the racism is unbelievable. Yet today, in fact, the current chairman of the Republican Party last week had to resign for making racist remarks about my people. Today, and the governor of my home state wants to be president of our country. He's running. He's one of the candidates.
I wasn't aware that was his views. I wasn't aware that, and I was going to ask you about racism today, if you still experience that, but apparently
Well, I don't personally.
Okay.
But
Okay.
when my daughter married a black man 25 years ago in Canton, Ohio, we were forced to leave my church 25 years ago. And I remember being in the mall, and everybody knows me in Stark County. They know who I am.
Right.
I remember being in the mall, and my daughter and her husband, the black guy, were walking through the mall, and I saw people, Christian,
Yeah.
turn away, turn up their nose. Then I heard the comment, "Oh, that Dr. Bartlett's daughter. Isn't that horrible? He allowed her to marry a colored man. I didn't allow her. She wanted to. She loved him."
How do you separate your faith and have such a strong faith? How have you kept your strong faith with how much racism and, abuse, that type of stuff have come from the faith, from people in the
My
church?
family, if I die before my wife, and I hope not, I want all that money. No, if I die before my wife, I have asked her to tell the world her own story. It's been painful, and she won't tell the world because she knows the man, Don Bartlette. She knows me more intimately than anyone ever will. And she won't tell you that the man, Don Bartlette, has come home in tears. I have come home in anger. In fact, last week was a very difficult week for me. I have resigned from the Republican Party in Ohio and Stark County, and I resigned from my church last weekend.
Oh.
I've had it. The racism I will not tolerate. The prejudice.
Oh my gosh.
And so now I go to a church downtown. We have black people, Oriental people, handicapped people, poor people, rich people, Native American people, handicapped people, and we have a church of diversity.
Right. That's the way it should. Well, that's the way heaven's going to be, right?
Well, according to some Baptists, no. The chairman of the deacon board in my Baptist church told me 25 years ago when he asked my family to leave, he said, "Don, that is not in my Bible. Black people do not belong in our church."
I feel like it's hypocritical. It's very, very hypocritical anymore.
Oh,
I don't know.
Hypocrisy rules our churches.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that there's a lot of faith questions sometimes, and it's really hard. Like I listen to your story and I'm just like sitting here amazed, and I understand, I could relate in so many different ways. Obviously I haven't walked in your shoes, and we don't walk in each other's shoes, none of us, but it's such relatable in some of the areas that I'm in awe. And the fact that you are very faith-based, and I know I've struggled with that, coming from an abusive home, coming from just not having all the supports. But it's interesting when you bring in the faith. I had when I was about, I guess, 8th grade, when my whole life was chaotic. I was at Roman Catholic church, going through CCD, going through everything. And there was only one nun that was incredible with me, like very respectful, seemed like she always looked out for me. But there was another nun who used to chat. I didn't go to Catholic school, but she used to chat about my life at home and how I pretty much would be a cycle of things, and had a priest who, when we went to confession, talked about what I talked about in confession. And I sometimes have that hard time, like, finding that faith after you've been ridiculed and facing, like, what you face with this discrimination, not just in the world, but also in the faith that you believe in. And I know I've questioned it.
My wife has always reminded me, and my pastor, who travels with me and helps in my ministry, he's always reminded me that you and I must not look at people, but look at Christ. The church is not the answer, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is the only answer. And I survive every day with the Word of God. And for me, personally, music, Christian music. In my car right now, I have a CD produced by Bill Gaither in Indiana. And every song on that particular album relates to my childhood, my family, my hurt, my hate, my survival. Literally, Denise, tears run down my face every time I turn on the album. But it helps me survive. I know I'm not alone. When I had my heart attack, and I hate to share this, but when I had my heart attack, one person from my former church, one, came to see me in the nursing home. One. And they have 1,100 members. Hello.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot be a part of that.
And they all know who you are.
Care about me. Show compassion. One person came to visit me in the nursing home. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
My children were there every day. My wife was there every day. And they have the love of God truly in their hearts. And so I know what you're talking about. But I'm running out of power, but I want to say this. The Word of God is what has helped me survive everything. And my wife will verify that. My wife knows me like nobody knows me.
I mean, you talked about that in your poem, like, praying to God and asking
God,
him.
I do not. Yeah.
Yes, that you do not know. I think that I relate to that so much too. But yet, we still, like, that's all we have,
Yesterday, I went down to Amish country and they have hired me to come and share my testimony December 9th at an employee banquet. And the former Amish Mennonite man, now a born-again Christian, he said, Dr. Don, I want you to share your faith openly because I have many people who think they know Christianity. They don't. And I want you to show them how God has changed your heart completely. And I'm going to do that. I'm not normally allowed to do that in a secular event. But he told me, I want you to talk about Jesus all you want. And I will. That's what keeps me happy, joyful, a lot. Yeah, I cry a lot. My Native American family, nothing to do with me today. One sister only. And I'm telling you, she means the world to me.
Yeah. So
but
she was the only one.
Family wants nothing to do with me. And it hurts. But I have family all over the world. I have family all over the world. They love me.
Yeah. Well, they say you can pick your family. It doesn't have to be blood related. So.
Absolutely. I'm running out of power. I'm running out of voice. But I want to thank you for doing whatever you're doing with my life story. And anytime I can do anything to help, let me know.
Well, maybe we can have you on again, and because there's some more things that you could talk about, so maybe we could have you on again.
That reminds me, Ann, my second message called Cooking for Breakfast. And it talks about a time in my life when my wife almost died in the hospital 10 days, and I'm left alone with 5 little girls. And boy, did I learn how to be the head of my household, the father of my children, and the lover of my wife. And she almost died on me.
Yeah. Thank God that lady was there to help you. Thank God your mom was there to put her arms around you and protect you when she needed to. And thank God that she had you not kill your father. I mean, thank God that man was going through on that hill and was able to take the rope off of you and tell you to run home. I mean, God was protecting you in the midst of all this stuff. Well, the last few seconds with Don was lost in the recording, and that's okay. He just thanked us for having him, and we were so blessed to have him. I'm so thankful that we were able to capture all of the audio, because we did have audio problems on his end with a lot of echo, which I was able to fix. So I'm just very grateful that we were able to tell that story and allow him to be on our podcast and share with whoever is supposed to listen to his message, that I pray that it reaches them, because this is a story that everybody really does need to hear. Thank you so much for listening to Real Talk with Tina and Ann. And thank you, Denise, for being a part of this. And like always, we will see you next time.